Peace Report. We are talking to Jeff Smith. He's author of Mr. Smith Goes to Prison, What My Years Behind Bars Taught Me About America's Prison Crisis. He writes that the book is a scathing indictment of a system that teaches prisoners to be better criminals instead of better citizens. Explain, Jeff.
Well, first of all, prison is an incredibly dehumanizing experience, and it doesn't have to be that way. There's other countries, particularly in Europe and Scandinavia, where prison is treated like a break from society, where you can acquire a skill and then you can come back out into the world and be successful. That's not how we do things in most of this country. There was almost no rehabilitative component or educational possibilities where I went to prison. In 1 year, there was a GED course taught once and then a hydroponics course for 2 weeks. That's how to grow tomatoes in water, right? So not a lot of real practical training to be able to come back and successfully re-enter society. Another way that prison, I would say, is criminogenic is that one of the things—
Criminogenic?
Encourages more crime, is that when we want to reduce recidivism, we know one very simple way to do it is to keep people in close contact with their loved ones and community support. And yet everything about prison makes that difficult. You know how expensive it is to make phone calls home in prison? These phone companies, I know you guys have done some stuff on these private phone companies that are gouging prisoners. Sometimes it could cost $3 or $4 a minute to talk to a loved one. You don't have any money in prison. Most guys in there still owe court costs, you know, from before they came in. And people are just hustling to try to get by.
How much did you make? What did you do in prison?
I worked in the food warehouse. I unloaded trucks, about 35 or 40,000 pounds of food every day with 6 other men at the prison. And I made $5.25, not an hour, but per month of full-time work. So when you make $5 a month, and it's a big misconception about prison, they don't give you things. You have to buy your own soap, your own toothpaste, just things for even basic hygiene. And that means that inmates are forced to hustle, you know, find ways to try to survive, whether it's, you know, cooking or cutting other guys' hair. There's all types of prison businesses going on in a thriving underground economy.
And then when you served a year and a day. But talk about what happens to people when they get out of prison. You talk about prisons being criminogenic, how outside life, because of the restrictions on people who have been in prison, it forces them right back in.
That's exactly right. When you're in prison, you're probably not getting any job training. You come out of prison in the year 2015, you don't even know how to point and click or use the internet. And then you come out, and there's all types of background checks for employment. About 90% of employers use background checks, and the majority say that they would never hire an ex-offender. Landlords, about 4 out of 5 landlords in this country use background checks and won't rent to ex-offenders. And then you can't even get public assistance in most states in this country, you know, if you were convicted of a drug crime. So there's
food stamps?
Food stamps, that's right. So there's all—
You cannot ever, for the rest of your life?
For the rest of your life. Now, that was part of the 1996 Welfare Reform Act. Some states have waived that ban. Texas, actually, just today has decided to waive that ban wisely, but most states still have some version of that ban on the books.
Now, if you wanted to vote out the legislators who've passed these very restrictive rules, in a lot of states you can't because you can never vote again.
That's exactly right.
Though it varies across states. In some places, I believe, like Vermont, you can vote from prison. That's
exactly right, but a huge variance. And Amy, you make such a great point. We ask people when they re-enter society, we want you to fly straight and become good citizens again. And yet the most fundamental tenet of citizenship, being able to vote, we deny in many states. And that makes no sense. So there's a lot of respects in which prison actually causes more crime. And a key one is that when people come out and they're already in debt, they probably don't have any community or family support, they don't have a place to live, and then we're making it even harder for them to get jobs, unless there are states or municipalities that do ban-the-box legislation.
Explain ban-the-box.
Ban-the-box bans the right of employers to discriminate against people who have criminal records.
To force a person to check a box that said whether or not you served time in jail.
Correct.
How did you make your way from, well, you were a politician, you go to jail for a year and a day, to becoming a professor here in New York at this illustrious university in the New School?
Well, first of all, I'm very lucky. And second of all, well, again, I'm blessed with a great education. I have a doctorate in political science from Washington University in St. Louis, and so I had some academic background beforehand. But look, when I came out of prison, I was a white guy who had 300 people who wrote letters on my behalf to the judge, including Missouri's Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, House Speaker, and Senate Majority Leader. I had savings. I had family support. I had and a great degree. Most people come out of prison with none of those things. Even I had a tough time getting a job. When I was applying for academic positions and other jobs, I was struggling. Imagine how hard it is for people who have none of the advantages or privileges that I had.
So you're a professor of urban policy now at the New School. What do you think would be the proper urban policy to avoid the mass incarceration crisis that we see in this country today?
Well, the first thing we have to do is get rid of mandatory minimum sentences, right? We're tying the hands of judges around the country who don't want to put people away for 15 years. If you're caught with drugs, with enough crack cocaine, which along with heroin is a plague in many of our cities, including St. Louis, my hometown. If you have a certain amount, then the judge has to give you 10 years in federal court. If there's a gun in your house or your car, they'll add on another 5. That's 15 years. You'll probably do 13 of that if you're in the federal system. And for a 19-year-old kid, caught with drugs one time, to be away for 13 years, it doesn't make any sense. So the first thing we should do is get rid of federal mandatory minimums. And the second thing is get rid of these 3 strikes laws. So first we have to look at the front end, sentencing reform. Then we have to look at what happens in prison and give more opportunities for vocational and educational programs inside of prison. And then third, we have to look at reentry and ease the process of successfully reentering by making sure that employers cannot discriminate against people with criminal backgrounds.
In this last minute we have with you, I last had you on after Ferguson, and you had a lot to say about what was going on in Ferguson, being from St. Louis. Last week, a judge in Ferguson withdrew as many as 10,000 arrest warrants as part of a series of changes in the court system. Explain the significance of this, but also just overall where we are today in Ferguson.
So the significance of this is that in Ferguson and in many of the towns, because I want to stress that Ferguson was the town that got the most attention, but there's a lot of even worse violators than Ferguson in North St. Louis County in terms of the targeting of young black males and a very harsh municipal court system. In Ferguson, this is significant because Ferguson had one of the highest percentages of anywhere in the country of the number of people living in the town having arrest warrants on them. And once people get locked up, often, even if they're only locked up for a week, they'll lose a job.
We have 10 seconds.
And this is very significant because it will give tons of young people an opportunity to make their way in the world without a criminal background.
I want to thank you very much, Jeff, for joining us. The book is fascinating. It's called Mr. Smith Goes to Prison, What My Year Behind Bars Taught Me About America's Prison Crisis. Jeff Smith is a former Missouri State Senator, now professor at New School.